I was born December 20th, 1943 in Kansas City, Missouri. And at the age of 4 months, I was adopted by Henry Togo Klein. Well, Togo was his nickname. That's everybody called him Togo. And Carol Klein. And we lived in North Dakota, I guess, until I think I was approximately 2.5 to 3 years old. My father passed away of cancer of the brain, and I guess it was a very low point in my mother's life, of course, and everything was so sad because of him passing away. And my grandfather, back then in those little towns, families were very close. I mean, there was like almost no separation between grandparents and parents and stuff. So luckily I had a wonderful set of grandparents that really took care of my mom, and it was her parents. And my father's parents had passed away at some point before all of this had happened. And so my mother and her parents moved, both Philip and I, my brother, to Albuquerque here. We actually were on a vacation, and we were here in July, which is a hot time. Of course, back then cars didn't have air conditioning or anything, and we were just about to die. And finally, we stopped at the first motel we could come to when we came to Albuquerque, and it was a Bluebell Court, way up on East Central. And we stayed there overnight, and my grandfather just couldn't believe how hot it could be during the day, but how beautifully cool it was at night. And he just almost sat outside all night long, and he just said, you know, this is where I want to live. And so they literally went home, and he sold the drugstore, and my mother sold the lumber business, and the whole family moved out here, and that was in July of 1947. And I loved it out here because now I could be around cowboys and Indians and stuff. Back in North Dakota, that's all. I mean, everything was farming in that part of the country, and dolls and things that I didn't care about. But out here I thought, oh boy, I'm going to get to see cowboys and Indians, and I just thought it was going to be the real West that I'd get to come out and see. Oh, I was such a tomboy. I don't know how my mother put up with me. She tried to buy me dolls and let me play house, and she bought me a little metal doll house and all kinds of stuff. And everything got shoved in the closet in lieu of cap rifles and little gun sets and cowboy hats and everything, because I loved Roy Rogers. He is my hero. I wish kids nowadays could have a hero like him. I had a bunch of kids in my neighborhood, and we all rode stick horses that my uncle made for me. Every time I got a new friend, he'd make a new stick horse, so I had like a cavalry that we all would get together. And I had a wagon that was all covered, like a covered wagon, and we'd pack that full of peanut butter and jelly sandwiches and Kool-Aid, and we'd go off, and across the street from my house was just mesa. And we picked a bunch of great big tumbleweeds and made a big tumbleweed fort. We'd sit inside the fort and have our peanut butter and jelly sandwiches and eat our Roy Rogers cookies and play with our Roy Rogers guns and everything. It was just, I had the whole neighborhood liking Roy Rogers. As I got old enough to where I could ride a horse, a real horse, that was one of my passions, is horses. And I just lived and breathed them, you know, up until I got old enough to ride one. My mother would buy me little horse statues and stuff, so I had quite a horse collection. And every year I'd ask Santa for a horse, and I'd always get this letter, well, they're under the snow, or one I was bringing, he fell out of the sleigh, and he ran away. And so I was always getting these notes. Of course, now I know my mother was doing this, but I was always getting these notes about why I didn't get my pony. And this went on until she finally got tired of making excuses and just said, you know, that we didn't have any place to keep one. Like I say, I was such a tomboy, and if I had any money, I was going to see Roy Rogers movies at the theater, or I was saving it up to go and ride a horse all day out at Fort Hills. And that's what that was just my two things that I really liked to do, was just to save up my money and go horseback riding and stuff. I'd always wanted a horse, as I've told you before. And one of the neighbors had some land out here in North Albuquerque Acres that she had horses on, and no house or anything, just the horses, and they'd have to haul water and everything to the horses and feed them and all this stuff. But she was a 4-H leader,
And I said, gosh, you know, I wish I could have a horse, and I'd love to live out there, and you know, I've wanted a horse all my life, and so on and so forth. She said, well, if you can't live out there, at least you could have a horse out there. She said, I'll look and talk to the 4-H kids, maybe one of them could take care of a horse for you. So she found the Copelands were willing to do that they would pay for, they would train a horse and keep a horse for their daughter and stuff, and she would have it for 4-H, and if I paid for the vet bills, and they would take care of the horse. So I thought that's a perfect setup. So I went to the fairgrounds with a neighbor that was a 4-H leader, and had found a family that was willing to take a horse for me and so forth. And I had told Steve I was going to go to this auction and everything, and he purposely sent me with no checkbook and credit cards and so forth. But anyway, I went to this auction, and I'd actually missed seeing the horse that I ended up buying because he'd already been through the auction. I got there kind of late, but this friend of mine that was there to buy a horse, you know, really liked this horse. And so she said, well, we'll wait after the end of the auction. We'll go talk to the auctioneer and find out who owns him and so forth, and maybe she could get a better deal for him, because nobody had bought him in the auction. So she went, and she was doing all the talking to this auctioneer guy who he was the one that was selling the horse for the people that owned him, and they were from Idaho. So he talked to her and said, well, you know, and they were talking money situation and so forth. And Rondo just kept kissing on me and just loving on me, and I fell in love with that horse instantly. And it's not like, oh yeah, you'd love any horse type thing. I had seen 50 of them, you know, at the auction, but there was something about him. And I'd written down a lot of the prices and stuff. Some of these other horses had gone for a lot of money and stuff. Well, I heard her dealing with this auctioneer, and I could get Rondo for $250 with no papers, or $500 with his papers. And I thought, gosh, you know, that would be so neat and stuff. But he was untrained. He was only 18 months old, so technically you're not supposed to ride a horse till they're 2. But I'm a fairly small stature, and this was going to be for a kid that was a fairly small stature. So the guy said he didn't see any reason. He said that he is so gentle, he's not done anything bad. And so I just let it go at that, and she said, well, I'll think about it, I'll let you know tomorrow, and so forth, you know. Well, I called her the next morning. I told Steve about it, and I said, I just can't get that horse out of my mind and stuff. And he said, well, he'll probably be gone and stuff by then, and I don't get off work until whenever and stuff. So I had the kids, got you and Ryan all dressed, and took you over to Grandma Carol's, because I was supposed to go to work that day in the nursery. Well, I went over and I told Grandma Carol that I can't believe it, I saw the horse in my dreams. And she said, where? And I told her, and she said, well, I am getting sick and tired of writing Santa notes to you of why you can't have a horse. She said, here's my checkbook, go get that horse. And I said, well, I can't, you know, I'm supposed to go to work. And so she's calling sick. So I called in sick, told him I couldn't make it and stuff. So here I am in my nursing uniform. I go over to the fairgrounds, and I run up I see him, he's just walking out of the stall with Rondo to put him in a horse trailer. And so I started getting tears in my eyes, because I thought he'd been sold. And I went up to him, I said, have you sold him? And he just looked at me and sees the big tears. He says, well, I think I have now, you know. So I bought and paid for him, and now I'm standing, and I paid a little extra to get his halter, and he had a blanket and stuff too. And so here I am standing in the middle of the fairgrounds with a horse and a halter, and I went to the payphone. I called Steve at work, and I told him where I was. So I said I would make some phone calls to see if we could rent a horse trailer or something to get him home. And I said, but until then, I'm here at the fairgrounds with him and stuff. I didn't want to leave him, and I didn't know what stall to put him in or anything. So, well, some people had come up that had been showing horses there, and they saw that I'd bought him. They said, I am so glad you bought him. He said he was such a perfect horse the whole time, this whole week that he's been here. But after he saw you last night, he has whinnied and whinnied and whinnied. All night long he was whinnying for you. And she said, and see, he's not even doing it now. You know, she said, that horse loves you or something. So I just felt like that was just such a bonding that I had with him. So here I call Steve at work. I said, guess what? And he says, what? And I said, I'm standing in the middle of fairgrounds, I said, with a horse. And he says, you did what? I said, and I told him. And he said, well, how are we going to get it home and so forth? And I said, well, you know, these people have offered to take him over the Copelands for me. So that's what we did. They loaded him up in a horse trailer. So Steve got off work and came, and we've got movies and stuff of everybody seeing Rondo for the first time and how gentle he was. And we've got some movies of me riding him at first. And then one of the gals I worked with in the newborn nursery, her husband did some training on him, got put his first saddle on and stuff. And Rondo never bucked. He never did anything bad. He was always just, you could put kids on him from the very beginning, and he was always such a good guy. And I had him for so many years. We had such a good time with him. It ended up, that story ends up 36 years later, I finally get my first horse.